r/AskReddit. Dear students of Reddit, what the worst teacher you've ever had? Substitute teacher for my astronomy class. She was old-fashioned and her punishments were a little outdated. I came late to class because I was doing a yearbook assignment and had a slip from my teacher that explained why I was late. We had just done a quiz and they were done, but she hadn't collected it. She accused me of cheating and then made me sit outside the classroom to do the test. She then went back inside and gave out a new assignment. She said everyone in that classroom was being awful and made them stay for lunch. She sent me to the principal's office and my class walked out on her. I had a really sweet guy and a few of my friends come in to defend me. It doesn't really seem that bad looking back on it now, but at the time she was not pleasant. I'm telling you, miss. The earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around. Not currently a student, but when I had a first-grade teacher who whenever she caught me chatting with another student when I was supposed to be listening would yank on my ear. On the flip side, in 10th grade one was in the hospital for a few weeks. Once I returned to school, my language arts teacher stayed after school every day to help me catch up until I was back on track with the other students in the class. Edit, clarification. Damn, the teacher would yank your ear? That's a little excessive. Was she a bitch? And did you ever tell your parents? And your 10th grade teacher seemed cool. That's the way they should be. Neutron physics professor. When we asked what the best way to study for the test was, he said to take the test since we would all end up failing the first time anyways. And he averaged the tests so we could theoretically never get an A unless we guessed right and studied exactly what he would test on. By the way, this is for grad school, which means that anything lower than AB can get you kicked out. As soon as I saw the word physics, I knew. My current professor in my nursing program. My cohort is made of 74 students and we all have her for the same class. Not one person has anything positive to say about this woman. During lecture she only reads the PowerPoint slides as they are without elaborating or teaching about the subjects of the slides. She then tries to relate what the topic of the slides are to her clinical experience in the hospital. But her stories are convoluted, distracting from the actual topic, and very off-tangent. She basically talks about herself as God's gift to anyone who has had her as a nurse. She is by far the biggest narcissist I have ever encountered. I have never met anyone who has thought so highly of themselves before. When it comes time for her exams, many students do very poorly because the material on the exams are often not covered in her lecture. There is almost zero relation of what she says in class and the questions she asks on the exam. Reading the chapters multiple times has proven to be an ineffective method in preparation for her exams. When students go to her office hours for help, she never gives any rationale to any answers on exams or slide questions. She says to read the book. Many of us question her knowledge of the subject she is teaching. It becomes suspect when not even a theory can be given. I understand the concept of students learning on their own, but she can't even point the ones seeking help in the right direction. On a side note, she claims she can smell a patient bleeding internally. Internally? Exclamation mark. I had a nursing teacher kind of like that, except she would deliberately fail me during fundamental practice. Only when working on the dummies. I would do everything exactly right, but she would tell me that I would need to redo it after everyone else has had their turn, so I'd always end up waiting until well past the class time to redo my practice in front of her. If I did it with another teacher, I would pass with flying colors. That teacher never could tell me what I was actually doing wrong. It was always, figure it out. My second grade teacher. I always had terrible penmanship, but we had to write a report on a book about an animal. I picked penguins. The next day she called me up in front of the class. She said my report was so bad and illegible that she was going to have to tell the principal and that I was going to be expelled. From second grade. I bawled my eyes out because I thought I was going to never be allowed to go to school again and knew I'd get my ass whooped when I got home. She told a second grader that he was going to get kicked out of school because of penmanship. She was just a terrible human. Reminds me of my fourth grade teacher. We had to write a story for writing class and I wrote a 3-page story about magical polar bears. When I turned it in, she took one look at it before ripping it up and throwing it in the trash. She told me I had to rewrite it because my penmanship was terrible. And she wouldn't let me get my original paper out of the trash. Gym teacher in high school. Roided up and dumb as a rock. Refused to sign off on doctor's notes students would bring in to be excused from gym class. Which was interesting when he did it to a girl on crutches. To this day one of the biggest assholes I've ever encountered. Or the math professor I had in college who was a brilliant guy and had degrees and awards coming out his ass, but he was a god-awful teacher and had less than zero people skills. That class was absolutely brutal. A gym teacher did that to me, made me participate despite having a medical note. I ended up in a lot of visible pain by the end of class and he was forced to call my dad at work and apologize. Fuck that guy. Health and safety teacher, late 50s early 60s maybe, he was very much like Ozzy Osbourne, stutter, forget unforgettable things, begin to vacantly stare into space sometimes halfway through conversation. Worst of all was the contradiction, oh Lord. He would say, write this down, this is the best answer, explanation for this question, then skip 20 minutes forward to when he was marking the questions and a meltdown would ensue because we wrote the wrong answer and he didn't know where we possibly could have got it from. My math teacher for grade 9? Was like this. He would only explain half the question then let you work on it. Never explained how to get the full answer. If you raised your hand for help he would come over, explain the first half again, maybe start the second half and then get distracted by another student with a question and leave. I had to ask my friends in class to explain everything to me. He couldn't understand why no one could answer his questions. A math teacher that also worked with the cheerleaders. The teacher gave extremely preferential treatment to the cheerleaders. They got out of class anytime for any reason. No homework on their menses, we all knew because they would tell the teacher directly while in class, but the other girls in class would complain about not receiving the same treatment. The teacher was highly disorganized and rarely actually taught anything, it was mostly, do this page in class, do this page for homework. She would gather the cheerleaders at her desk during class for little pow-wows on hemp lotion (MLM) in school, I kid you not. Went in one day after struggling on problems and said, look, I figured it out. Her response? Well, let me give you a cookie. Got sent to detention for telling her to fuck herself. She also called me out twice in class for being a pagan. She really liked to harp on that. Later on she was fired for having sex in her classroom, not with a student though. Vindication at last. I hope she never works with school-aged children again. That's a way to get fired. Geez. High school in the mid-80s. I took the school's first ever computer class, taught by the gym teacher. She read straight from the book. If the book was wrong, and it was wrong a lot, then she was wrong and we had to answer wrong on the test or fail. That infuriates me. Obviously she didn't know the subject, but she blindly trusted the book. I don't know how you make it to being a teacher and not know books can be wrong. My 2nd and 5th grade teacher, Mrs. B. She was absolutely awful. In 2nd grade one had picked a 5th grade level book from the library, The Old Willis Place by Mary Downing Hahn, in case anyone's wondering, and she took me outside the classroom, sat me down, and told me to my face that I was not smart enough to understand this book, and that I would absolutely fail if I tried taking a reading test on it. And she didn't say this with any empathy, it was completely cold-blooded, especially for a 7-year-old. Later I scored a 100% on the reading comprehension test, and she tried to convince the vice principal that I cheated, and berated me in front of the class because of this. Thankfully, the VP believed me and I'm still proud of that 100. She also shouted at me when I wasn't smiling for no reason, and I started crying. She moved up to 5th grade the year I entered 5th grade, and I got stuck with her as my homeroom teacher. She would give me demerits for the smallest things, and even threatened to give me detention for reading a book from the public library, during reading time, because it wasn't authorized by the school. Yeah, whatever lady. She would target me over other students and berate me in front of the class. She also refused to let me go to the nurse's office to get ibuprofen and a menstrual pad, and I almost bled all over my skirt because of it. We also met with the school counselor about this and she spent the whole meeting accusing me of being a troublemaking brat who didn't listen to orders, which is entirely untrue if you read any report card of mine from elementary school. My early primary school English language teacher. She was generally rude to everyone, but she hated my guts especially because I spoke better English than her and she always marked me wrong for spelling words the British way instead of the American way, even though she knew they were still correct. She would confiscate my personal belongings for no reason and refuse to give them back. I still remember this one time I was fiddling with my collection of silly bands, I had nearly 50, under the desk, and after confiscating them, she refused to give them back to me because she'd, quote, already mixed them in with all the other ones I've taken, and as I don't know which ones are yours, I won't be giving them back. This was said several days later after I'd still not gotten them back and my parents had gone up to confront her about it. My 8-year-old self was heartbroken. She was fired several years later. 3rd grade teacher. I had ADHD undiagnosed at the time, later formally diagnosed, and she hated my guts. I never understood it. She would constantly call me out and be overly cruel. She also almost made me pee my pants because she wouldn't let me go. She once made me sit on a big carpet and look up a word I had said in a dictionary, for over an hour. When I said I couldn't find it, she yelled in my face that then I shouldn't say it. I loved school before then, but I severely declined after that, and it wasn't until adulthood that I began to love learning again. She'll never see this, but screw you, Mrs. Benson. My 8th grade life skills teacher. Little bit of context, life skills was an elective course in middle school and I absolutely loved it in 6th grade cause the teacher was super friendly and taught us cooking, outdoor survival skills, and working with Microsoft Excel. Since I loved the class so much, I decided to take the next life skills class in 8th grade, but it was a horrible experience. The teacher did nothing but make us watch things like CSI, Miami and write reports on it. Other than that, we had to write essays on random half-assed prompts such as "What is your favorite color and why?" Other things she did was punish the entire class if someone did something stupid, which is very often. When one guy was talking when he wasn't supposed to, she made all of us write "I will not talk in class when Mrs. Blank is speaking" until we filled up 2 pages, front and back. She would go around checking to make sure everyone wrote it neatly, not too large, and did not write vertically 1 word at a time. When she judged someone's writing as too messy or too big, she would grab the paper, tear it up in front of them and toss it all over the ground. She'd then just yell at them to pick it up and start all over. Halfway through the semester, we received a prompt about her class, so I basically just wrote about her class teaches nothing about life skills and that her punishing the entire class for one person every single time is just a waste of our time and unfair. She ended up kicking me out of the class, sending me to the principal's office and giving me detention for disruptive behavior in class and hostility towards the teacher. I was basically dropped from the class after that. On the flip side, my 7th grade history teacher took me in as her teacher's aide for the second half of the semester, which took the place of that class as an elective. I had a health teacher who doubled as a gym teacher for my freshman year. He was super sexist. Almost every lesson he would say something that degraded females in some way, but not enough to be reported to the school board about. For example, we were going over what different types of workouts did what, and he said that women shouldn't do a particular set of exercises because they broadened the shoulders and you don't want broad shoulders, ladies. Also, if you were a female in his class and you answered a question or gave an opinion, he would stare at you for a moment before shaking you off and blatantly ignoring you. It really sucked because I had been home-schooled until high school, so my first experience with public school was this middle-aged man talking down upon my entire sex. I was pretty chubby and shy at this time, so his comments lowered my self-image pretty badly. I would have to force myself out of bed every day and I would cry as I got dressed for school because of how much I dreaded going to his class that day. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more Reddit stories like this.